here at the at Husqvarna's 2024 Enduro model launch. Pretty special, I think, obviously here in Norway, because one, it's a tip of the hat to the Scandinavian roots. But really interesting. Maybe just give you guys a little bit of an insight into what these days are all about. And we've got all the bikes here, all 7 models. They've had several of each, a few with acro pipes on, some other, like pro component suspension, bits and pieces. But the effort that the Husqvarna guys go to with all their product managers, all their marketing team, all their content creation team. Juha Salminen, an 8-time world Enduro champions here down from Finland. But let's really talk a little bit about the significance of these bikes, because I think we knew, like a week ago, I was in Lesotho in South Africa for the KTM launch, so it wasn't a big surprise that we were going to see completely new generation bikes from Husqvarna as well. Based heavily off the motocross bikes, from a year ago, which got upgrades right across the board to, suspension, to frame, to engine, to bodywork, the whole lot. So it's been 10 years since KTM has bought Husqvarna, or Husqvarna's been under the KTM group banner. It's 120 years, of Husqvarna as a brand. But I think, obviously these things are a complete new generation. So let's, just putting that in context, it's not a huge surprise for us, because we saw at the KTM launch a week ago where they released their 2024 Enduro machines. We saw completely new bikes based heavily off the motocross bikes that have got literally 95% new components. So what does it mean by new generation? Usually when we think about new generation, there's enough parts on the bike, there's changes to several components to go, oh, that's a new generation. But I think it's almost like these 2024 models from Husqvarna go a step past that, in the sense that they're a completely new concept. And so what do I mean by that? So the Enduro bikes are closer on paper than ever before to their motocross counterparts, in that they've got the same bodywork, they've got the same seats, they've got the same frame, albeit with some different bits and pieces to adapt it to motocross. They don't have the same suspension, and probably that would have to be the hallmark, I guess, of these new bikes. We all know that there's a new closed cartridge, exact 48mm WP fork. It's something that's been long overdue. People are saying, these bikes really, with an open cartridge fork, the design limitations, and 9 times out of 10, if you tell people which end, they ride down in the nose a little bit if you're a kind of faster guy. So a very important addition. But I think you can only understand the fitment of that fork when you look at these bikes and the fact that the anti-squat chassis. So anti-squat means it drives the wheel into the ground, which effectively throws weight onto the front. So essentially they really had to fit that new firmer fork. Takes some of that nervousness out of the front end for a fork that dives a little bit in order to create a bike with a balanced chassis, and that's exactly what they've done. So make no bones about it, these things are not just new generation, they're a completely new concept. And really, when you look at the things, like, everything is new about them, even the brake tech, brakes and clutch. We got new calipers, we got new levers, we've got new bits and pieces. So essentially the DID rims and the Michelin tyres at both ends of the bike, that's pretty much all that carries over from last year. Coming back to the suspension, because it is a sort of like central to these bikes, and it does actually change the ride and the poise and the stability of the things a lot. But I think fork is one thing. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that it's a completely new exact shock absorber on the rear too. Completely redesigned, lighter. It's actually shorter, but there's a different linkage ratio to retain that 300mm worth of travel. But again, it's about all those elements working with the frame. As I said before, like in the past, you move from a motocross bike to an Enduro bike, you can see at the steering head, oh, there's less gusseting, there's different wall thicknesses, you can visibly see differences in the frame. You can't on these bikes. What we do know, and it's really interesting, that this concept is that they've got a rock solid motocross-based frame, and they've worked some compliance into that in a different way. And by that I say the triple clamps are different. Some of these forged areas, down around here, where the foot pegs and the swing arm mounts, they're more compliant. Some of the engine hangers, they're more compliant. So instead of that traditional thinking of let's have a much more pliable frame, for Enduro applications, that's how they've achieved it. And according to the design team, they can control those elements a lot more. Aside from the fact that actually you're not having to build, 7 different frames for 7 different models. So I think that's pretty important. So what else? What else jumps out about these bikes? There was a lot of conjecture before this launch, with TPI, transfer port injection on their 2-strokes, been out since 2018. The things have had some idiosyncrasies. They've been bloody big sellers. The 300 2-stroke has been one of the biggest sellers around the world, and in Australia in particular. in spite of some of those little idiosyncrasies. You know, that hunting on a constant throttle, it would hunt a little bit. So people weren't quite sure what was going to happen. We'd seen the throttle body injection appear, you know, on the two-stroke motocross bikes a year ago. So it was really interesting to see that, you know, they've managed to evolve the throttle body injection system on the two-strokes to such an extent now that they can actually fit them to these bikes and meet Euro 5. And the really interesting thing is that, you know, not everybody liked the TPI. It was a very linear sort of, like, it was deceptively fast power, but it was linear, and a lot of people said it wasn't a traditional kind of two-stroke. So it's interesting that the way Husqvarna have been pitching these new two-strokes in the sense that they're like a car bike. So, you know, you can load it up at low revs and they will grunt and tractor up things, and they do that amazingly well. Obviously, you know, part and parcel of that is a new electronic power valve. But also, you know, when you hit that, where you can get into that power band and you want some, you know, excitement, it's got that two-stroke feel. So I think two-stroke lovers out there are going to absolutely love this thing. The other big element of that, of the two-stroke, obviously with the, you know, the throttle body injection, TBI, is the fact that that's now mated with the electronic power valve. So without going into too much detail, I think, you know, what it has done is now, you know, you've got the dual map switch on the bar. So instead of in the past we're effectively turning from, you know, map A to map B, or, you know, the mellower map, you know, that was simply like a, you know, it was a change in ignition. Now you've got a genuine change in map. So it's very, very noticeable. And now the, you know, the two strokes have fallen in line now with the four strokes. In the past, the four stroke, map 2, the green map was more aggressive, whereas opposite on the two strokes, confusingly. Now exactly the same, map 2, more aggressive. So you've got that as well. Four strokes, again, you know, sport for choice. You've got four machines and all very, very different character. Probably on paper, you'd have to say that the 250 is the standout in terms of change, because it's gone to an 81mm piston. But really, look across the board. You simply look at the heads on these things and you can sort of see the, you know, the top end. There is, beside the transmission and some of the lower end components, there's not a lot that hasn't changed on the 250 and 300. The 450 and 500, completely new cases. It's really interesting when you get to look at old and new, you know, side by side. And the reason they've done that is standardised frames, standardised engine mounts, which allows them to actually saves them having to make a bunch of frames, which is pretty key. I think one of the other really big things is the serviceability of these bikes, and by that I just mean, you know, it just makes it so much easier from a DIY perspective or from a workshop. You know, from a DIY perspective, you've got torque settings actually stamped into, you know, bits and pieces on the bike. There's a little triangle that actually indicates to you that you need a copper washer, that kind of stuff. And I gotta say, just looking across the board, you know, whether you look at the new switch blocks, whether you look at the all-new forged, you know, side stand, you know, the new chain slider, the new chain guide, you know, it just screams quality and attention to detail. So look, from really quickly and really from a top line performance point of view, it's going to be very difficult. As I said, we sort of tested 7 bikes. You know, we have only had one day to do it, and we've done it in very technical terrain, which means we haven't had, and we've had to swap with a bunch of other journos, so we haven't had the opportunity really, you know, to adjust the bikes, get them perfectly set up for us, etc. So it's really just a sort of bit of a top line sense. But I would have to say, across the board, and people are going to really like this idea, particularly bigger and faster guys, the bike's front to rear weight bias is much more balanced now, and you know, you can smash things with a lot more confidence. Interestingly, at pretty much the last, say, 5 launches I've been to for KTM, Husky, and, you know, and even Gas, it's that Explore fork has been sort of sitting down a little bit, and people have been trying to wind up compression into it to level the chassis out. So I think for the first time ever I've been to a launch where people are going, oh, in some of this tech stuff, hey, can we back off a little bit of the compression to give me a little bit more compliance? Because it is, you know, it is a firmer ride. I would say that the 4-strokes, I think, have adapted a little bit better to this new firmer suspension, just the way, particularly in this sort of rocky stuff, the way that they have that sort of planted kind of secure feel. So, you know, when you have firmer suspension, for instance, you take a 150 2-stroke out and it feels a bit skittish. So, you know, a faster guy I know is going to, you know, be really aggressively jamming the bike into obstacles. Overall, these bikes have taken a massive step forward. They are, you know, literally 95% of them, you know, are new. As I said, it's really difficult to encapsulate, you know, all the changes that they've made and all the models. But look, I just implore that you check out our website over the coming weeks. We're going to have a lot of detail about that, answering, you know, your most frequently asked questions, but also taking advantage of talking to some of the guys here, you know, from the product managers, the R&D guys. You know, it's fascinating to sort of see, get a bit of an insight into these machines and you know, the time, the effort, but the passion in particular, you know, for these engineers, you know, who produce machines that I think they need to be very, very proud of, and there's no doubt they're landmark machines. I think it's going to be, it's a very exciting time for the brand, Husqvarna, and probably the most significant, I think, in terms of Enduro models, probably the most significant upgrade that we've seen from these things, you know, since 2013 when KTM bought Husqvarna.